Flight attendant harasses Black doctor on board, unaware she's Surgeon General of the United States. Welcome everyone to today's thrilling tale, a story of high-flying drama at 30,000 feet, where appearances deceive and hidden truths lurk just behind a friendly smile. In this gripping account, we follow a physician whose compassion soars as high as the clouds outside the plane window, unaware that she's about to face the most unexpected confrontation of her life. Little does anyone around her suspect that this poised and professional traveler holds a prestigious title, one so remarkable that it could shake the flight crew to their core. Prepare for twists, turns, and karmic justice as we delve into a story that proves how quickly destinies can change when prejudice meets real power. Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. If you're excited about this story, let us know. If you enjoyed the video, press 1. If not, press O. Your feedback really inspires me to gather more uplifting and meaningful stories. From the moment Dr. Cassandra Morgan entered the bustling concourse of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, every detail seemed heightened and alive. The early morning sunlight filtered through the giant windows, illuminating drifting motes of dust and revealing nervous, hurrying crowds. Cassandra gripped her sleek carry-on, weaving between anxious families and business travelers anxious to reach their gates. She usually loved the buzz of airports, the sense of possibility in the air, the fleeting glimpses into other people's lives. But something about this particular morning set her on edge. It wasn't just the slight drizzle outside or the glare of fluorescent lighting overhead. She sensed an undercurrent of tension. Perhaps it was the suspicious way a uniformed flight attendant, tall, thin, her posture rigid, glanced at her from across the terminal. Cassandra couldn't be sure yet, but she felt it, that flicker of an ominous presence, whose meaning she couldn't yet decode. Cassandra was on her way to an urgent summit in Washington, D.C. As the newly appointed Surgeon General of the United States, her schedule had been filled with non-stop meetings, health policy briefings, and a dizzying whirlwind of events and media appearances. The pressure to maintain composure, always being watched, always being judged, weighed on her. She knew she had to look the part. Her navy blazer and matching pantsuit were perfectly pressed, her hair elegantly swept back, and she carried a thick binder with official documents. Occasionally, people recognized her from televised public health announcements, but rarely did she volunteer her position. She cherished her privacy, especially when traveling alone. Still, the watchful eyes of that flight attendant lingered. Cassandra considered shrugging it off. Maybe the woman was merely on the lookout for potential trouble, or was simply intrigued by the binder with the official seal Cassandra carried. Yet the hairs on the back of her neck wouldn't lie flat. Something about the attendant's gaze promised a confrontation she was ill-prepared for this early in the day. Once on board the sleek Boeing 737, Cassandra took her seat in first class, an unexpected upgrade offered by the airline, presumably a courtesy for a passenger who traveled so often between Atlanta and Washington. She settled into seat 2A, grateful for the extra legroom. A few aisles back, she noticed the same flight attendant from the terminal, whose name tag read Karen Fletcher. Karen seemed oddly fixated on Cassandra, despite a multitude of other tasks. Two older gentlemen in the front row kept pressing their call buttons, but Karen's eyes kept straying back to Cassandra instead. Unease crept through Cassandra's veins. She forced a polite smile when their gazes locked, but Karen's thin-lipped smirk set Cassandra's pulse racing. It wasn't overt hostility, yet more like the threat of it. Cassandra tried to steady herself, thinking, "You've navigated Senate hearings. You've dissected complex policy debates. You can handle a flight attendant with an attitude." But her intuition told her that something more sinister brood under that crisp uniform. Moments before takeoff, a mother with a crying infant hurried into first class. Judging by her exhausted expression, she had missed her earlier flight. The mother fussed with the baby, who wailed in discomfort. Cassandra, known for her gentle bedside manner and skill in pediatrics despite her senior role, she still practiced medicine, instinctively leaned in. "Do you need any help?" she offered softly. Karen Fletcher swooped down the aisle with a disapproving glare. "Monsieur A.M., she said curtly to the harried mother, "you'll need to calm your child. We can't have this disturbance in first class." An uncomfortable hush fell over the surrounding passengers. Cassandra sensed the mother's embarrassment, but also noted Karen's rigid tone and the subtext that accompanied her words. Cassandra gently asked the mother if she needed anything to soothe her baby, hoping to keep the situation from escalating. Karen's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me," she said to Cassandra, "this is none of your business. Let the airline staff handle it." Cassandra swallowed her rebuttal, feeling that tingle of foreboding intensify. The plane taxied onto the runway, engines roaring with anticipation. Cassandra felt her heart pound, not from the typical thrill of takeoff, but from an undefined fear. She had faced journalists determined to twist her words, critics questioning her credentials, even protesters at public events. Yet, never had she encountered such a personal and pointed tension within mere minutes of meeting someone. The flight attendant's repeated glances throughout the pre-flight demonstration only solidified Cassandra's sense of impending conflict. She tried to refocus on the binder in her lap. Inside were data charts from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, real numbers and facts that grounded her. The plane soon lifted into the sky, a gentle force pressing Cassandra back into her seat. Outside, the cloudscapes rolled by in cottony waves. In the hush of cabin pressure, Cassandra reminded herself, "Stay calm, stay composed. You're on a simple flight. It'll be over in 2 hours." But deep down, she suspected the time in the air would feel far longer than that. About 30 minutes into the flight, turbulence rattled the overhead compartments. Passengers exchanged anxious looks while the seatbelt sign blinked insistently. A voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Alvarez speaking. We're expecting some moderate turbulence for the next few minutes, so please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Cassandra steadied her binder, which threatened to slide off the tray table. Just then, Karen strode through the aisle, presumably checking on everyone's safety. Yet when she passed Cassandra's row, she paused. Cassandra could practically feel the tension radiating from the attendant as she scanned. Cassandra's tailored suit, lingering judgmentally on her dark complexion. Then Karen leaned in, her tone barely above a whisper. "You better not cause any trouble on this flight," she said, voice dripping with condescension. Cassandra, stunned, felt her face flush. Before she could respond, Karen continued, "I've got my eye on you." Then she snapped upright and continued down the aisle as if nothing had happened. Cassandra's hands trembled in her lap. She had come across subtle racism before, but this was brazen, chillingly so. Cassandra's mind whirled. Why was this woman targeting her? Was it simply because she was black and seated in first class? She recalled the times she'd been mistaken for a nurse or an assistant rather than the lead doctor. The times others questioned her credentials before they even knew her name. She had learned to keep her composure. That was what dignified professionals did, right? But this was different. The harassment was so plain, so unprovoked. Cassandra quietly resolved not to let it slide. Not because she wanted a confrontation, but because she knew that letting behavior like this go unchallenged only fueled more prejudice. She took a calming breath, focusing on the hum of the engines, and reminded herself that the best approach would be to remain calm, gather her thoughts, and if needed stand up for herself with the graceful resolve that came with her position. 40 minutes later, the turbulence subsided. The flight attendants resumed service, offering drinks and light snacks. Karen approached Cassandra with a forced smile that did nothing to mask the icy disdain in her eyes. "Would you like something to drink, miss?" The deliberate pause before "miss" almost felt like a sneer. Cassandra noticed another flight attendant, a younger woman named Paula, watching closely from the galley. Paula's expression suggested she was aware something wasn't right, but felt powerless to intervene. Cassandra decided to keep her voice level. "Just water, please." Karen poured from a bottle, but her hand slipped, sending a stream of cold water splashing onto Cassandra's suit. Shock rippled through the row. Karen's gasp was comically overdone, eyes wide as though she'd made an innocent mistake. "Oh, no, I'm so sorry," she said, not sounding sorry in the slightest. Cassandra stared at the wet patch spreading across her lap. Passengers nearby exchanged whispers. Cassandra forced a thin-lipped grin. "It's all right," she managed, her voice betraying none of the anger surging inside. Karen nodded curtly and moved on, but Cassandra felt a burning vow form in her mind. This flight attendant would not have the last word. As Cassandra dabbed at her suit with napkins, she became aware of a subtle yet growing unease from those sitting around her. The mother with the baby, seated across the aisle, offered a sympathetic glance. The older gentleman in the front row looked back at Cassandra, confusion and discomfort etched on their faces. Wasn't first class meant to be calm and refined? Instead, tension crackled in the recycled air. Cassandra wondered if she should alert the pilot or request a different flight attendant. But a call button or a quiet complaint might not capture the gravity of Karen's hostility. Cassandra's position as Surgeon General demanded nuance. She couldn't afford a public feud over a spilled drink, at least not without cause. She reminded herself to remain patient, though each second felt like an exposed nerve. Little did she know, the real test of her mettle was minutes away. A sudden commotion from the coach cabin made every head turn. A passenger screamed, "Help! Somebody help him!" The cry sent a ripple of alarm through the plane. Cassandra unbuckled her seatbelt and craned her neck, seeing Paula dash toward the curtain dividing first class from economy. From the frantic tone of voices behind the curtain, something terrible was happening. Cassandra's instincts flared to life. She was, first and foremost, a doctor. The authoritative voice inside her mind commanded her to act. Yet she remembered the turbulence, the seatbelt sign, and the flight attendant who already seemed determined to sabotage her. Nevertheless, duty overrode caution. Cassandra swiftly unfastened her belt and headed down the aisle. Karen intercepted her with a fierce glare. "Where do you think you're going? Sit down!" she snapped. Cassandra locked eyes with Karen, feeling her own pulse throb with indignation. She spoke in a calm but resolute tone. "I'm a doctor. There's an emergency and I need to help." Karen scoffed. "Oh, really?" "A doctor," she said, the sarcasm sharp enough to cut steel. "Well, we have protocols, and you're not part of them." Cassandra bit back her anger. Someone's in trouble. You can either step aside or be responsible for the consequences. Karen's mouth twitched, and for a split second, Cassandra thought the woman might physically block her path. Then a strangled cry for help sounded again. Karen hesitated, then grudgingly stepped aside, hatred flickering in her eyes. Cassandra wasted no time, hurrying into the economy cabin, bracing herself for what she might find. The economy cabin was a sea of panicked faces. Passengers stood in the aisles, craning their necks to see what was happening. In the middle of it all, a middle-aged man lay slumped over, his face ashen. Paula knelt beside him, her hands shaking as she tried to find a pulse. Without hesitation, Cassandra dropped to her knees, gently pushing aside the wide-eyed flight attendant. "Let me take over," she said in an even, authoritative voice. A quick assessment told her the passenger was in the grip of a severe cardiac episode. His breathing was irregular and his pulse was faint. Cassandra called for an automated external defibrillator, AED, her tone firm enough to break through the chaos. Other passengers began stepping back to give her space, and Paula scrambled to fetch the emergency medical kit. Within seconds, Cassandra was performing compressions, calm but focused, each press measured and precise. A hush fell over the cabin as everyone realized a life hung in the balance. In that critical moment, time seemed to slow. Cassandra could feel every beat of her own heart as she administered CPR. The plane jolted with a patch of turbulence, threatening her balance. But her years of medical training took over, enabling her to continue compressions steadily despite the shaking floor. When Paula returned with the AED, Cassandra swiftly attached the pads, scanning the device for instructions. The automated voice guided them, analyzing heart rhythm. Do not touch the patient. Passengers in the nearest rows held their breath. Sweat beaded along Cassandra's brow. The device recommended a shock. She pressed the flashing button, sending an electrical pulse through the man's body. He twitched. The tension soared. Cassandra resumed compressions, mentally counting off the beats. In her peripheral vision, she saw Karen lurking near the bulkhead, a mixture of alarm and disbelief etched into her features. After the shock, the man gasped and his eyes fluttered open, only to roll back. Cassandra leaned in, listening for breathing. His pulse came back weakly, but he wasn't fully stable yet. She administered rescue breaths, carefully monitoring his chest for rising and falling. Finally, she felt a steadier pulse. Relief warred with vigilance. Cardiac events could be fickle. She instructed Paula to grab the oxygen tank. From the corner of her eye, Cassandra noticed that the entire row had begun to cheer softly, tears glistening in the eyes of the passenger's wife, who was too overwhelmed to speak. This moment of gratitude and triumph was exhilarating, but Cassandra knew the man still needed immediate follow-up care once they landed. She turned to Paula. We need to inform the pilot to request an emergency landing. This man needs further treatment as soon as possible. Paula nodded and rushed to the cockpit. Cassandra stayed at the man's side, offering comfort, ignoring the stares around her. In that moment, all that mattered was preserving life. Captain Alvarez came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a medical emergency. We will be diverting to Charlotte Douglas International Airport for an immediate landing. Please remain calm. Cassandra felt a wave of relief. Charlotte wasn't far. The man would be in a hospital within the hour. She could already see him regaining consciousness, thanks to the oxygen. He tried to speak, but Cassandra gently hushed him, telling him to save his strength. Passengers around them began to applaud her efforts. Others thanked her, amazed at her swift, confident action. But within that chorus of relief, Cassandra spotted a single, rigid figure, Karen, whose face betrayed a tangle of emotions, anger, humiliation, and perhaps grudging respect. Their eyes met, and Cassandra glimpsed a flicker of fear. Whatever Karen's intentions had been earlier in the flight, she now realized her prejudice had nearly kept a man from the care he desperately needed. As the plane began its descent into Charlotte, Cassandra made sure the patient's condition remained stable. Paula assisted, clearly grateful to have someone so capable taking the lead. Once the adrenaline began to wane, Cassandra quietly gathered her thoughts. She was no stranger to saving lives, but this was the first time she had done so mid-flight, under the scrutiny of dozens of onlookers. Still, what weighed on her mind more was Karen's blatant hostility. Cassandra replayed the encounter in first class, the water accident, the scornful tone, the open challenge. Now, in front of everyone, Cassandra had proven herself not merely a passenger, but a life-saving medical professional. What if Karen had succeeded in stopping me? Cassandra's chest tightened at the thought of how differently it all could have ended. But for now, she focused on the positive. a man would live. After a tense landing, paramedics boarded to take the patient off the plane. Cassandra gave them a quick rundown of his condition. They thanked her for her swift action, and the passenger's grateful spouse embraced Cassandra. Tears streamed down the wife's face as she struggled to express her thanks. Cassandra felt her throat tighten at the genuine human connection. As the medics wheeled the man onto a waiting stretcher, Cassandra stayed behind, letting them do their jobs. Then Paula touched her arm gently. "You saved his life," the young flight attendant said, her voice trembling with admiration. Cassandra nodded, wiping her brow. "Just doing what I'm trained to do. I'm glad I could help." Paula's gaze flickered to Karen, who stood near the exit row, arms crossed, her face pale. Cassandra noticed how the younger attendant's body language shrank in Karen's presence, as if she feared being reprimanded for showing Cassandra any kindness. As paramedics departed, the captain invited Cassandra to step off the plane briefly while the crew coordinated with ground control. Cassandra did so, ignoring Karen's unwavering stare. Outside on the jet bridge, Captain Alvarez extended his hand, a grateful smile spreading across his face. "I just wanted to say thank you. That was a remarkable display of expertise." "We're lucky you were on board." Cassandra nodded graciously. "I appreciate it. I only wish I'd gotten there sooner." The captain shook his head. "You did everything right. Once we get back in the air, I'll personally make an announcement commending your actions, unless you'd prefer to remain anonymous." Cassandra hesitated, recalling how she disliked undue attention. But after a moment, she decided perhaps it was time to be recognized for her role, especially in front of someone like Karen. She softly replied, "An announcement is fine, Captain." Back on the plane, the airline's ground staff took a few minutes to confirm seatbelt checks and refuel. The cabin lights hummed overhead, an artificial brightness that cast everyone's expressions into sharp relief. Karen busied herself near the galley, carefully avoiding Cassandra's gaze. The tension between them felt tangible. Meanwhile, passengers in first class were abuzz with conversation about what had happened. The older gentleman in row one approached Cassandra to offer heartfelt thanks. Even the mother of the crying infant cooed over Cassandra's heroism. Cassandra smiled politely, feeling a mixture of relief and dread. How would Karen respond now that it was painfully clear who Cassandra was and what she was capable of? Finally, Karen approached with a controlled expression. She offered a glass of water this time, without spilling it, though her hand trembled slightly. "On behalf of the airline, we thank you," she said, her voice measured. Yet she couldn't hide the bitterness simmering beneath. Cassandra accepted the glass. Karen leaned closer, speaking low so no one else could hear. "I'm still the senior flight attendant on this flight," she hissed. "And I won't have you acting like you run things here. Understand?" A flash of disbelief coursed through Cassandra. Even after everything, Karen refused to show genuine respect. Cassandra stared at her calmly, letting the silence carry her answer. Karen's eyes narrowed. She pressed her lips into a thin line and stepped away, leaving Cassandra reeling at the blatant hostility that refused to fade. The plane took off again, leaving Charlotte's runway behind. Captain Alvarez soon made his promised announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to acknowledge the heroism of one of our passengers today, Dr. Cassandra Morgan, who stepped in to save a fellow traveler's life. We all owe her our gratitude." A smattering of applause rose in the cabin. Cassandra felt her cheeks warm. She glanced at Karen, who clutched the intercom phone at the front of the cabin, face taut, forced to listen to the praise for a woman she clearly despised. The pilot concluded, "We're fortunate to have such a dedicated professional on board. Thank you, Doctor." Cassandra saw Karen's knuckles whiten around the intercom phone. A fleeting satisfaction stirred in Cassandra's heart. Let her see, Cassandra thought. Let her witness that the person she tried to bully is far more than she assumed. After the announcement, Karen vanished into the galley for a suspiciously long time. Meanwhile, Paula approached Cassandra, handing her a complimentary blanket. We really appreciate what you did," she whispered. Then, glancing around nervously, she added, "Karen's been with the airline for a while. She, doesn't like to be upstaged, especially by someone well." Paula's voice trailed off, but Cassandra understood. The younger attendant's unspoken words spoke volumes. Karen had a chip on her shoulder when it came to certain passengers, and Cassandra's success seemed to strike a nerve. Cassandra placed a reassuring hand on Paula's shoulder. "I know," she said softly, "but it's not your fault." Paula's eyes glistened with relief, grateful for Cassandra's empathy. Just when Cassandra thought the flight might settle into an uneasy peace until they reached DC, a new problem emerged. One of the overhead compartments above the exit row refused to stay shut, possibly damaged during the turbulence. Every time the flight attendants closed it, the latch clicked but then popped open again after a few minutes. A small piece of carry-on luggage threatened to spill out onto unsuspecting passengers below. The crew scrambled to secure it with duct tape and other makeshift fixes, but the compartment refused to comply. Captain Alvarez radioed the maintenance team, who advised a potential second unscheduled stop if it posed a safety hazard. The tension in the cabin soared again. Nobody wanted another diversion. The arrival time in Washington was already delayed. Worried chatter rippled through the seats, and anxious glances fell upon Karen and Paula as they tried to manage the situation. Amid this new crisis, Karen appeared more rattled than ever. She fumbled, dropping the roll of duct tape. Her composure cracked, and beads of sweat glistened on her brow. It was Paula who finally managed a creative solution, wedging a folded metal latch from the galley supplies into the compartment mechanism. The overhead bin stayed closed for now. Passengers exhaled in relief, but Cassandra noticed Karen casting furtive glances her way. "Is she blaming me for this too?" Cassandra wondered, though it seemed absurd. The overhead compartment fiasco reminded Cassandra that stress often brought people's deeper traits to light. Karen's bigotry was already apparent, but now her professional competence looked shaky. Cassandra felt a twinge of pity. If Karen had simply done her job without prejudice, she might not be unraveling in front of everyone. The flight, now behind schedule, finally began its descent toward Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport. Passengers sighed in collective relief, grateful the turbulent journey was nearly over. Cassandra packed away her binder, which she hadn't touched since the emergency. She felt the weight of the day settle on her shoulders, like she'd run an emotional marathon. Ahead, she knew more challenges awaited. Meetings and briefings never ceased. But for a moment, she allowed herself to dream of a hot shower and a calm evening, trying to flush away the confrontation with Karen from her memory. Still, she dreaded the final interactions on the plane, especially if Karen tried one last time to assert her perceived authority. As the wheels touched down, a hush of relief spread through the cabin. Captain Alvarez's voice came over the PAR once more, thanking passengers for their patience. The plane taxied to the gate and seatbelts unclicked. People stood to retrieve their bags. Cassandra waited calmly, letting the rush subside. She had no desire to get caught in the crush of passengers. Karen lingered by the exit door, performing her final duties in a stiff, mechanical manner. Paula assisted elderly passengers, offering a bright smile. Soon, the aisle filled with people disembarking. Cassandra remained seated, uncertain whether Karen would make another attempt to humiliate her. Then she saw the mother with the baby approach Karen. The mother quietly thanked her for the flight. Karen flashed a tense smile. It was as if the entire flight's events hung unspoken between them. When Cassandra finally stepped into the aisle, she braced herself. She moved forward, carry-on in hand, stopping in front of Karen. For a moment, neither spoke. The tension crackled like static electricity. Cassandra could sense the bitterness behind Karen's eyes. She almost felt pity again, but also a burning sense of justice. Then, in a calm, low voice, Cassandra said, "I sincerely hope you learn from this experience, because the next passenger you mistreat might not be as patient." Karen opened her mouth as if to retort, but no words emerged. Cassandra continued, "I saved a man's life today, not because I want praise, but because that's what I do. I'm a doctor." She paused, letting each word land. "And, for the record, I'm also the Surgeon General of the United States." A ripple of shock passed through Karen. Her eyes widened, face reddening. She stammered, That's not possible." Cassandra simply lifted her binder, its official seal clear as day, and said nothing. Then she turned and walked off the plane. Outside the gate, a small crowd of staff, alerted by the captain, were waiting to thank the hero doctor. Cameras from local news affiliates aimed in her direction. Someone must have tipped them off. Cassandra wasn't fond of publicity, but she also recognized its power to highlight important health issues. She gave a brief statement praising the flight crew who cooperated to help save the passenger's life. She also hinted that most of the crew acted professionally, diplomatically avoiding naming Karen outright. Even in the flurry of attention, Cassandra's thoughts drifted to the final expression on Karen's face, stunned horror, overshadowed by the knowledge that her prejudice had been laid bare. Even if Karen tried to deny it, the story of the black female passenger, who turned out to be the top doctor in the country, would circle among the airline staff soon enough. Later that evening, Cassandra learned that passengers had posted videos online. They'd captured the confrontation, the life-saving measures, and the final moment of revelation. By the time Cassandra reached her hotel, her phone buzzed incessantly with messages, some from outraged viewers demanding the airline hold Karen accountable. The official statement from the airline arrived in her inbox, an apology for any inconvenience and a promise to investigate. Cassandra sighed, exhaustion pressing down on her. She wanted to put the day behind her, but she also felt a sense of responsibility to see this through. In a world where countless instances of discrimination went unrecorded, she realized the significance of shining a light on this incident. Perhaps, in some small way, it would help curb such behavior in the future. Days later, Cassandra wrapped up her final meeting at the Department of Health and Human Services. Stepping outside onto the busy street, she scanned the news, updates on her phone. Buried among stories of political maneuvering and health advisories, she found a small headline. Airline announces dismissal of flight attendant after investigation. Details were sparse, but it was clear Karen Fletcher had faced consequences. The article mentioned an incident involving unprofessional conduct and alleged discrimination. Cassandra exhaled slowly, a mixture of relief and sadness. She never reveled in seeing someone lose their job, but the karmic retribution felt warranted. Karen's prejudice and hostility had no place in an environment that demanded impartial care and safety for every passenger. In that moment, Cassandra felt a renewed sense of purpose. Standing there amid the swirl of government workers and visitors in the nation's capital, she embraced the knowledge that her role was not just about public health. It was about representing possibility, challenging biases, and standing up for what was right. She tucked away her phone, determined to keep pressing forward in her mission to safeguard and uplift every life she could touch. Thank you for joining us for this whirlwind journey of drama, suspense, and justice at 30,000 feet. Our tale reminds us that in moments of crisis, courage and compassion reveal a person's true character, while prejudice can cause ruin in mere seconds. If this story stirred you, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with friends who love a good dose of suspense, and subscribe for more gripping narratives from everyday life. Your support enables us to bring you fresh and unforgettable stories, each brimming with unexpected twists and moral reckonings. We can't wait to see you again for our next exciting video. Stay tuned and stay inspired.